Okay, hello. Well, in this video, I really center on chapter 4, How Language Works, one of the chapters that you must study from. And what I've done is highlight the sections in the chapter that I consider the most important for you to have in mind. And I will try to address these sections as fully as I can, considering that, well, there's always this time constraint when it comes to recording videos. But I'll do my best, and if I need to do so, just like I did with Cook last week, I will record more than one video. But let's hope I don't need to do so, or at least I don't need to record many videos. Excuse if I end up, needing to do so. Okay, so first of all, the idea of what this language instinct and its essence is, right? The fact that we use language to convey news, to communicate information, as I anticipated in my first video on why he has chosen the word instinct. Then he acknowledges that there are two European scholars, right, who wrote in the 19th century and who addressed this, this skill, this capacity, and studied it in great depth that we all have, this capacity for language, was the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, who came up with a principle that we uphold still today, and it is the principle of the arbitrariness of the sign, the lack of logical connection between a word, right, and its meaning. And then the other scholar, the other linguist working in the 19th century that he acknowledges is von Humboldt, who presaged Chomsky and said that language makes infinite use of finite media. This idea that we then associate with Chomsky and with Chomsky's teachings on what language is was presaged by another linguist, von Humboldt, saying exactly the same in the 19th century. So we use a code, says the author, to translate between orders of words and combinations of thoughts. So we think, right? And then we're able to translate what we think, these combinations of thoughts, into specific orders of words, not random listings of, words put one after the other, but there is, an arrangement, a pattern that we follow when translating into words what we think. And that code, the code that translates between orders of words and combinations of thoughts, is what Chomsky calls a generative grammar. That is to say, a discrete combinatorial system, discrete meaning separate from one another, a finite number, there is a finite number of discrete elements, in this case words, that are sampled, combined, and permuted to create larger structures, in this case sentences, with properties that are quite distinct from those of their elements. So what a sentence ends up, meaning is more than the meanings of its, constitutive elements taken in isolation. It's a whole idea, it's a whole proposition that makes sense in itself as a whole, as a unit. And in a discrete combinatorial system, here, like language, there can be an unlimited number of completely distinct combinations with an infinite range of properties. And he points out, a piece of evidence here that he makes use of is pointing out that our genetic code, in DNA is another example in the natural world of a discrete combinatorial system. So grammar or language is functioning like a system that is not disconnected from what happens in the natural world at large in a system like our genetic code. Okay? All right. Following page. The way language works is that each person's brain contains a lexicon of words and the concepts they stand for, a mental dictionary. This is something we tackled when addressing Cook's material. So our brain contains this lexicon, this mental dictionary, and also a set of rules that combine the words to convey relationships among concepts. This is the mental grammar that he postulates we're born with. The fact that grammar is a discrete combinatorial system has two important consequences. The first is the vastness of language, right? So with a few rules, just a few, set of rules, or a small set of rules for that matter, a few rules that we apply innately, unconsciously, we simply know how to do so. We are able to produce a vast number of sentences, of statements, of things we say. So language is immense. Language is a product of what we use, of what we produce and interpret. He includes here estimates of the number of sentences that an ordinary person is capable of producing are breathtaking. And then the second consequence, I will get back to what is explained here in a minute, but the second consequence of grammar being a discrete combinatorial system is that it is a code that is autonomous from cognition. Here, pointing to the fact that Chomsky believes that grammar is modular, that we have that the ability for language is, part of a module, is separate from other cognitive abilities we have. For example, the ability for as I was saying, for example, the ability for creating categories, categorizing the world to better understand what happens around us. So, a grammar, in Chomsky's view, specifies how words may combine to express meanings. And that specification is independent of the particular meanings we typically convey or expect others to convey to us. Thus, we all sense that some strings of words that can be given common sense interpretations do not conform to the grammatical code of English. Right? So this is related to the fact that he sees language as an ability that is separate from, say, the cognitive realm of meanings, the cognitive realm of, concepts, conceptualization, as I said before, the cognitive realm of us being capable of categorizing the world. So these sentences, the ones he lists here, are ungrammatical in the sense that every ordinary speaker of the casual vernacular, of the way of the variety we consider, the most spread and say has been labeled as standard, has a gut feeling, right, that something is wrong with them, despite their interpretability. Ungrammaticality is simply a consequence of our having a fixed code for interpreting sentences. And here comes the sentence that we discussed for Cook as well, the sentence that was first introduced by Chomsky. Colorless green ideas leap furiously, to prove the point that although this may look and feel grammatical, it doesn't make sense, right? So this notion of syntax, of grammar, of language being modular and being separate from other cognitive abilities that we have, in this case from this more conceptual ability, the one of allowing us to make sense, to give meaning, to understand meaning, can be independent of each other. I said before that there's something exemplified here with Pinker's resorting to Faulkner's novel excerpts, and it is the property of language called recursion. That's why I made a comment here, because what he's saying is that he's able to add an introductory section to the excerpt that he has taken from the novel and create a novel sentence by simply adding Faulkner wrote and then the piece that he has taken from the novel, and then he can in turn say Pinker wrote that Faulkner wrote, and the piece that he has taken from the novel, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. So this ability to do so pertains to a feature that natural languages have, which is the feature of recursion that we touched on when dealing with content in Cook, which has been defined by Bradford, one of the sources that I consulted also before, as an interesting property that allows a given structure to contain more than one instance of a given category. And defined in Spanish by Di Tullio in the following terms: todas las lenguas contienen mecanismos formales para obtener unidades complejas a partir de unidades idénticas más simples. Estos mecanismos se denominan recursivos. Por ejemplo, la coordinación y la subordinación son mecanismos recursivos que permiten añadir un número potencialmente infinito de miembros. So, here an excerpt from Alice in Wonderland, her saying, "Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't exactly know what they are. But though common sense and common knowledge are of no help in understanding these passages, English speakers recognize that they are grammatical, and their mental rules allow them to extract precise, though abstract frameworks of meaning." So then the question is, how might the combinatorial grammar underlying human language work? And he says that it was, postulated that this combinatorial system, that underlies human language, is like a word chain device. And he defines what a word chain device is: a bunch of lists of words or prefabricated phrases and a set of directors for going from list to list. A processor builds a sentence by selecting a word from one list, then a word from another list, and so on. But then he explains a word chain device is the simplest example of a discrete combinatorial system. So that's why it was postulated that the combinatorial grammar that underlies human language can be a word chain device, for it is also a discrete combinatorial system. For it is also capable, like human language is, of creating an unlimited number of distinct combinations from a finite set of elements, of the elements included, in the lists that are given as options. And then he gives examples. So here we have the options, and then the different possibilities that are accessible simply by combining different options, and then making it infinite for there is this loop at the top here that can take the device from the happy list back to itself any number of times. So we can say the happy dog eats ice cream, the happy dog eats ice cream, and so on. Just by repeating the choices over and over, then we can have a list that never ends. So some psychologists have suggested that human language is based on a huge word chain stored in the brain. But then he says that the modern study of grammar began when Chomsky showed that word chain devices are not just a bit suspicious. They are deeply, fundamentally, the wrong way to think about how human language works. And then he gives a listing of the problems that are associated with word chain devices and how they cannot be taken as the way human language works. The first problem is again, pointed out with this, sentence that Chomsky came up with to show that nonsense can be grammatical, but also to show that improbable word sequences can be grammatical. So word sequences that may be formed by means of word chain devices can show grammaticality in the sense of somehow abiding by the rules that make, a sentence belong to a system like English or Spanish, but still not make sense, therefore not be feasible options as real sentences used in either language. So when people learn a language, Pinker says, they're learning how to put words in order, but not by recording which word follows which other word. It's not just a matter of remembering what word must precede the one that I want to use and which other word must follow the one that I want to use, right? The word in itself, the word per se, but rather what we know how to do is to understand which word category, a noun, a verb, or any other one, must be used before or after the word that we want to use. So we understand what category must follow or precede another one, and by so doing, we don't need to remember exactly the exact words we must choose to form grammatical sentences in any language. And then the second lesson that Pinker points out is that the nouns and verbs and adjectives are not just hitched end to end in one long chain. There is some overarching blueprint or plan for the sentence that puts each word in a specific slot. So this pertains to Cook's pointing out the existence of a principle, the structure dependency principle, that allows us to have sentences in any language that explains that a sentence is more than, putting words one after the other, but that there is a plan, that there is a pattern that sentences follow, and this pattern is, underpinning what we actually hear or see in written, but it's still there, making the sentences possible. Okay, and then Pinker explains that Chomsky came up with the definitive refutation of the very idea that a human language is a word chain, and he did so by using subordination and the possibility to produce subordinate sentences as proof that we're dealing with a capacity that is a lot more than a word chain device. And when you read the chapter, you must have read this section carefully, and as users of the English language, you know that when we begin a sentence with either, then eventually we should produce another sentence beginning with or. And then if we begin a sentence with if, eventually our sentence must contain another sentence beginning with then. But there's no way for a word chain device to remember what has happened prior to the immediate context, from the immediate column that the device is choosing from. Here is the employment of either or if way before the moment when the device must make a choice here on the right. But as Pinker says, a word chain device here is an amnesiac, remembering only which word list it has just chosen from, nothing earlier. By the time it reaches the or then list, it has no means of remembering whether it said if or either way back at the beginning. So the possibility for subordination, right, served Chomsky the purpose of proving that language is a lot more than working like a word chain device. So, and in turn, the problem gets to be deeper because of the characteristic for recursion that natural languages have. For each of these sentences can in turn be embedded in any of the others, right? Making the possibility for, an infinite number of sentences containing, the sentences that we produce ad infinitum. So we can say, if either the girl eats ice cream or the girl eats candy, then the boy eats hot dogs. Either if the girl eats ice cream, then the boy eats ice cream. Or if the girl eats ice cream, then the boy eats candy. So for the first sentence, as Pinker explains, the device has to remember if and either so that it can continue later with or and then, in that order. And for the second sentence, it has to remember either and if so that it can complete the sentence with then and or, and so on. You see? So this is proving that knowing how to, produce such sentences is a lot more than putting the words one after the other, just like a word chain device would do. At this point, I usually resort to a different source in my presence-based classes, which is the grammar book by Marianne Celsi-Murcia and Diane Larsen Freeman. And they present us in one of their chapters with the notion of phrase structure rules. Here. And these rules are listed here. The first one of which is linearity, the second one of which is hierarchy, and the third one of which is categoriality. It's, that we were saying that, reading off from Pinker, is that when people learn a language, they're learning how to put words in order, but not by recording which word follows which other word, but they do it by recording which word category, noun, verb, and so on, follows which other category. So this is in line with the rule of categoriality, that some words and groups of words behave grammatically in very similar ways and in ways that are different from other words or groups of words, right? So this is knowing, as us knowing, our brain knowing, that the way a noun phrase works, the position it can take in a sentence, it really depends on the category this word noun has. It's not that we can place nouns anywhere in a sentence, but our brain knows, and now that we are, explicitly learning to explain this, we use the meta language to put in words what we intuitively understand. We know that a noun can take up the position for, say, subject or object, but not the position, reserved for verbs. Okay, so category pertains to belonging to a type of entity and not simply being able to remember each of the words that we want to use in sentences by heart. At the same time, understanding that there is a hierarchy, right? That a head is a type of word that has more importance than, say, the accompanying elements, for it is the head in the phrase that will specify the type of phrase we're dealing with. And then the head in the phrase will allow for specific modifiers or specific determiners to be used in conjunction with it. And of course, there is linearity. For we do put words and morphemes, in a sequence. We do use, this phrase structure rule of linearity to make up words and sentences, but it's not just it. But linearity applied in conjunction with hierarchy and in conjunction with categoriality, all at the same time. These are the rules that allow us to form sentences, sentences that are made up of phrases in any language, in any natural language, as per how Chomsky and Chomsky's, grammarians explain the workings of our mind in conjunction with language use, with our language capacity.